Welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain, and what we are talking about today is matne al katuv b'Torah, someone who tries to make a condition in a transaction of some sort that runs counter to Torah. So, for example, somebody who says, I want to be a Nazir or Nizira. In my case, I don't. This is not a declaration. Somebody who says that they want to be a Nazir or a Nizira on condition that they're able to drink wine. Okay, the halakha for madne al katuv b'Torah, somebody who adds a t'nai, a stipulation or a condition that is anti-Torah to an agreement that they are entering, we say that the actual agreement is kayam, the agreement goes on, but the t'nai is batel. The condition falls away, it is void. So that's kind of an interesting place to be. The way we come to it in the Gemara in Makot is actually not through something like Nizirut, but actually comes more through the realm of what we might call a T'nai Shebimamon, condition that relates to financial matters, which seems to be a different subset of the discussion of Matne al Mashakatuv B'Torah. And in fact, we seem to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda in T'nai Shebimamon, things that are financially engaged, stipulations that are counter to Torah, that in a kol t'nai shebamamon kayam, any condition that we make about money stands. So the agreement stands and the condition stands. And that's actually where we enter the conversation in Makot on Gimel Amud Bet 3b. And what I want to do is I want to talk about the both of these things. The idea that kol t'nai shebamamon kayam, any stipulation, even if it runs counter to Torah regarding money, stands, and the logic behind matnei masha katuv b'Torah, t'na'o batel, that the t'nai is void, but the agreement continues. Because that is an interesting, you might have thought the t'nai doesn't make sense and the agreement doesn't make sense anymore, but it doesn't seem to do that. It just seems like the t'nai is what I might call a nothing burger. It just doesn't count. So let's take a look at where we enter this conversation in Makot itself. And from there, we'll move on to the logic behind each of these different kinds of basic rulings about t'naim, about conditions. So the Bavli in Makot has an interesting example where we contrast two types of t'naim that one might make in a financial situation. So the first example is, do you say al menat shelo teshamteni shvi'it, right? On condition that shvi'it, that the Shemitah year will not cancel the debt, versus do you say al menat on condition that you can't take from me in the Shvi'it year, in the Shemitah year. And the reason why I'm saying that those are the two options is because the Gemara actually stipulates similar options when it comes to Onah, the problem of overcharging, right? If you overcharge up to a sixth, the sale is fine. If you overcharge a sixth, the sale is fine, but you have to return the money. If you overcharge more than a sixth, the sale is null and void. And so the Gemara says, what if somebody says to their fellow, Al menat she'ein lecha alai ona'ah, I want to do this sale with you on condition that you have no taina, you have no claim of ona'ah against me, versus if somebody were to say, Al menat she'ein bo ona'ah, on condition that this sale will not have the ruling of ona'ah. It seems like in these cases, we would distinguish between saying on condition that ona'ah does not apply versus on condition that you will not demand that we follow the rules of ona'ah in this case. Now, that seems to be an introduction to a t'nai shebimamon, right? So the Ritva says, why is it that if somebody says, on condition that you do not hold onah against me, that it works, even the t'nai works, lefisha t'nai hu beinehem, because the condition is being made between the two of them. Uki'ilu mochel lokeach hona'ato. It's as though the buyer, the consumer, is waiving their right to that money that ends up being overcharged. Aval keshehitna almanat she'ein bo ona'ah, but if you try to make a stipulation that there is no ona'ah here, hitna she'ein b'mekach hazeh din ona'ah. What you've tried to do is you've tried to stipulate the laws of ona'ah don't apply. You're not asking the other person to waive their right. The law applies, but waive your right. You're actually saying, I'm making the condition that the law of ona'ah doesn't apply. That doesn't work. Klomar shelo techol alav, that the rule of ona'ah does not apply. V'hu matneh al ma she'ef shar, right? That is something that is impossible. Dal korcho techol bo din ona'ah. Beyond a person's will, ona'ah either applies or doesn't apply. So the Ritva is making a distinction between whether a person is mochelet, is waiving her rights to certain money, and then that t'nai works, or a person is being told ona'ah simply does not apply. That is a no-go. Okay. The Rambam actually says, because mechila, it seems, waiving rights, it seems, is the logic behind kol t'nai shebamamon kayam. Why do we accept conditions like you won't have a taina of ona against me, even though the Torah actually wants us to keep the laws of ona, because somebody can be mochelet, somebody can waive their right to money, and therefore kol t'nai shebamamon kayam. And the Rambam takes this a step further and says, by the way, if you just say almanat she'ein lecha alai ona'ah, if you just say on condition that you have no ona against me, and you don't actually stipulate what it is that you should have to give back to the person or how much they're actually waiving, that doesn't even work. You have to actually stipulate what they're waiving, how much. Aval b'mefaresh ein lo honaya, then there is no ona'ah, because shekol t'nai shebamamon kayam. Any stipulation when it comes to money is legitimate, but only because we say that the other party is able to waive their financial rights. So that seems to be a very convincing logic for why kol t'nai shebamamon kayam, even if you're trying to undermine what the Torah would have said. Now, I just want you to see that the concept of kol t'nai shebamamon kayam comes up already in Tanaitic literature, in the Tosefta and Kiddushin, and it goes as follows: Almanat she'i meti lo tehez kukali abam. If somebody does kiddushin on condition, a man betroths a woman on condition that a person will, if God forbid, he dies and they don't have children, that she will not fall to yibum. Harezo mikudeshet ubatel tnao. She is considered betrothed, but that t'nai, that condition, is ridiculous. Shehitna al mashakatu v'torah. The person tried to make a stipulation against something written in the Torah. The general rule is, if you make a condition against something written in the Torah, that t'nai, that condition just doesn't hold. The agreement does, the betrothal holds, the condition does not. What about another example? If you say, I'm betrothing you on condition that you will not ask me for food, clothing, or sexual relations, harezo mikudeshet utna'o batel. She is betrothed, but the t'nai, the condition, is meaningless. Okay. Now this is interesting because ksut and she'er, right, the monetary responsibilities from the husband to the wife, from those biblical responsibilities, those things are mammon, but ona, but sexual rights, conjugal rights, those are not. Sehaklal, here's the rule. If somebody tries to make a stipulation against the Torah, if we're talking about an issue of money, the condition holds. But if it's not money, then the t'nai falls away, right? So that's our general rule. Now here you might imagine what would have happened if he just said Hitkachili al menat she'en lech alai she'er uksut. You get engaged to me, get betrothed to me on condition that I don't provide you with the shelter. I don't provide you with the food. I don't provide you with the clothing. It's possible that because it's a Tnai Shebamamon, we might say that totally works and that's fine, right? But that's our general rule. Now, what I want to do is I want to show before we even get to the logic, we already said that a very plausible logic for Kol Tanai Shebamamon Kayam is the idea that somebody can waive their rights to money, right? We still haven't gotten to the logic of matnal mashakatu b'torah tna'o batel, the general logic of something that's not in the case of money, but is just a t'nai that is against something in the Torah. Why doesn't the t'nai bring the whole agreement down? Why is the t'nai itself just void and the agreement continues? So we haven't gotten to that second part. But I do want to say one more thing about kol t'nai shebamamon kayim. First of all, there are people who give other reasons for why kol t'nai shebamamon kayim. It's not just mechila, but I will say the Gemara, it shows up over and over again. The concept of mechila actually seems to show up over and over again. So that's the preferred explanation that I want to use. But I want to also show that even in kol t'nai shebamamon kayim, there are exceptions. So I'll give you an example of an exception. The Mishnah of Bava Batra, for many of you who learned Bava Batra before you learned Sanhedrin, before you learned Makot, right? You learned how Omer Ish Ploni B'ni B'chor Lo Yitol Pishnayim. If a man says, my eldest son should not get the double portion of inheritance, Ish Ploni B'ni Lo Yirash Im Echav, my son so-and-so should not inherit a portion alongside his brothers. Lo amar klum, they've said nothing. Sheitnal mashakatu b'Torah, because they have tried to set a condition against what's written in the Torah. Now, I would look at this and say, what do you mean? Kol t'nai shebamamon kayim. This is about money. What's the problem? So the Bavli, the Gemara, actually says, afilu temer Rabbi Yehuda. You can even say that this Mishnah fits according to Rabbi Yehuda, who usually says kol t'nai shebamamon kayim, that any stipulation when it comes to money holds. But here, hatam yadav kamachla. In the case of a woman, let's say, with a monetary issue, she knows and right, if you imagine the ksut, the share and the ksut only, she knows and she's able to be mochelet. She's able to waive her rights. Hachalo kamachel. But in this case, the son is not waiving his rights. Okay. Now, that kind of begs the question, what if the son says, I do want to waive my rights? I don't know why a son would do that, but let's say, what if a son would want to do that? Another explanation that the Rambam cites is En Adam Yacholo Rish Lemisha Ena Ra'uli Yorsho Velol Akor Yerusha Mina Yoresh. A person may not give inheritance, qua inheritance, to somebody who is not is not a proper heir, and they cannot uproot inheritance from somebody who is a proper heir. Even though this is a case of mammon, of finances. Why? Because it actually says in the discussion of inheritance, V'haita livnei Yisrael lechukat mishpat. This will be for the children of Israel as an engraved law. Lomar shechuka zo lo nishtana ve'en hatnai mo'il ba. What this is trying to say is this law does not change, and a t'nai, a condition, does not work to change it. Bein shetziva v'hu bari, bein shayashchiv meira, bein ba'al peh, bein bechtav eno mo'il. Whether the person was healthy, the testator, I think that's the name of the person from whom people inherit, or the person was on their deathbed, whether the person said it out loud, or they even wrote a contract of it, no dice, because we have a gzerat hakatuv, right? So this is an exception for some reason to kol t'nai shebamamon kayim. Okay, so that's part one. Kol t'nai shebamamon kayim, generally, probably because a party is mochel, but you might have a situation where a person would not be mochel or wasn't mochel, or you might have a situation where there's a gzerat hakatuv that tells you we don't want you messing with this. Fine, but let's go to the other side of the ledger. Matneh al mashakatuv b'Torah t'na'o batel. Somebody says, I'm going to be a nazir al minat that I'm going to drink wine. And we say the person's a nazir, but they still can't drink wine, right? The t'nai is batel, the t'nai is void. What's the logic behind that? So the first thing we need to understand is that t'naim are not just simple sort of they're not just indications. A t'nai is actually a very formal legal phenomenon. And in fact, the t'nai has particular rules in order to obtain. So the Mishnah in Kiddushin, for example, in the third parak says, Rabbi Meir Omer kol t'nai she'eno kit'nai b'nei Gad u'bnei Reuven eno t'nai. Any condition that doesn't follow the model of the conditions made by the children of God and the children of Reuven, where they say we want to be able to have land east of the Jordan, and we are going to go before Bnei Israel and help them. We're going to help them conquer the land, and then we'll come back. And that's the t'nai, that's the condition. All conditions have to follow that model. Shneimar, as it says, Vayomer Moshe Alehem, Im Ya'avru b'nei Gad uvnei Reuven, Uchtiv v'im lo Ya'avru chalutzim, right? The way that it is written is, it's what's called a t'nai kaful. It says, if yes, then X. If no, then not X. And it's also written first Hain and then Lav. First, if yes, meaning if they go forward, if they go to Eretz Israel to fight with everybody, then they will get X. And if they do not, then they will not, right? So every t'nai has to follow that pattern, okay? So what's kind of interesting is the Balei Tosfot say, well, that's why we think now Mashakatuv Torah, the t'nai is batel. Look at the way the Balei Tosfot say it. V'hashta dialfinan mehatam. Now that we learn from the conversation in the Torah between Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven and Moshe, and notice half of Menashe shows up later in the conversation, but not at the beginning in Bamidbar, okay? Now that we learn from there, Dimahani t'nai levatel hamasa, that a t'nai, that a condition has the power to void an action or to void an agreement, right? That's a big chiddush, that the condition has the possibility, if they don't fulfill the condition of going into Eretz Israel and helping to fight, they lose their opportunity. That is a big chiddush. So now that we know that from Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, that's our halachic precedent. Amrinan, we say, dafka kishe'enu matne al mashakatuv b'Torah. It has to be, a t'nai is only a t'nai. And remember, with Mammon, maybe it's not such a t'nai. Maybe it's actually the other side giving mechila, even though it sounds like a t'nai. But here, when a person is matnel mashakatuv Torah, they're not following the degen, they're not following the model of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, right? It has to be dumya de Bnei Gad u'Bnei Reuven shelo hitnu al mashakatuv Torah. It has to be following the condition of Reuven and Gad, who did not stipulate something against the Torah. Now, I think this is so interesting because this suggestion that the reason why Matnel Mashikatu Torah is void is because we follow, it doesn't have the power of a t'nai because it doesn't follow the t'nai of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. I find this very surprising because when Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, I understand that their condition wasn't to break the Torah, but their whole thing that they were trying to do here was trying to undermine where they were supposed to go and what they were supposed to be doing. So it's just I think a surprising logic, but it's true. The t'nai itself, the condition itself that they set, which is that we will go in and fight, that's not something that's against the Torah. But it is kind of ironic that within a conversation where Moshe says to them, you are doing something that is going to keep people from going to Eretz Israel, and you're kind of against the Torah. I'm surprised to see it. Okay. Now, Tosfot Yeshanim say something else, right? They quote Rabbeinu Tam, Omer Rabbeinu Tam, Dahave maflig b'dvarim. Actually, when you make a t'nai, al mashakatuv b'Torah, you make a stipulation. Somebody says they want to be a nazir al minat, that they're going to drink wine. They're just being exaggerating. They're just saying ridiculous things. Ve'in zeh t'nai klal. They don't even mean it to be a t'nai. Now, why would you say such a thing about Nazirut? I don't know. I could understand how maybe in a relationship, somebody's being a little obnoxious and you might use a t'nai to make it sound like you're annoyed at somebody. But here, that would be like the reason why it's not a t'nai is because he didn't mean it to be a t'nai anyway. She didn't mean it to be a t'nai anyway. They were just trying to be like, when pigs fly, if pigs fly, I'll do X, Y, Z. They know pigs are not going to fly, but what's ironic here is that they're basically saying, okay, but if you know pigs are never going to fly, aren't you trying to say you'll never actually do this? But basically, what we say is because t'nai is such a formality, it doesn't even count as a t'nai. Like it's a nonsensical condition, and all you have left is the agreement that was made. Now, what I will say is, I think it's really interesting. You know, the the Rashba has like similar, but there's a little bit of a different addition here that I want to share, which is he says, "V'hainu nami mamon dafka t'nao kayam." A person can make a t'nai against the Torah in cases of money. Why? Because it can be waived by the other party. But something that's not money, like the pain of someone's body, tahainu ona, like saying I betroth you with only on the condition that I can withhold conjugal rights. It cannot be waived. And honestly, he's just being ridiculous. The way that he's talking, maybe to do something obnoxious to her, it's unclear. I would just say, maybe don't accept that proposal. And how much more so if he's making a t'nai on something that isn't even in her ability to waive, right? We're saying that tsar haguf, we're saying it shouldn't be waived, or like we don't want people to waive, but there's also even things where you just have no jurisdiction over it, right? You have no jurisdiction. Like somebody who says, I'll marry you on condition that you don't have to have a marital connection that could either be broken with chalitza or fulfilled through yibum with your yavam, with your lever, with your brother-in-law, if the husband dies without them having children. That's something that, she has no power over. She can't, that's something that happens immediate, right? Mishamayim hiknua, like the act of death essentially is what makes her zkukali yabam. Liavam. Shezo megudeshet utnai batel. Of course, she's megudeshet. But I just think it's interesting that the Rashba distinguishes between two different kinds of things. That there may be some, matnao mashakatu b'Torah, where the issue is it's lo nitan lemechila. Now, what does he mean by lo nitan lemechila? It shouldn't be waived. It can't be waived. And he's saying there's another level, which is she'eno biyada limchol. Like it isn't even something she'd be able to waive. Like in theory, a person could waive their ona, their conjugal rights, even if they shouldn't, right? But you can't waive having a zika to a yava. So that's kind of interesting. I also want to say Chidush Ramban has something a little bit different, which to be honest, I find a little bit opaque. I'm not sure I totally understand. And I actually have been looking to see if there are other people who are giving interesting suggestions as to what this means. But it seems like the Ramban thinks that part of what's going on here is the especially with the Sher Ksut and Ona case, that the Kiddushin are somehow chalin, and once they're chalin, you can't take the T'nai piece. Look at what he says, and I'm not, again, I'm a little gray on what this means. I think that the reason why making a T'nai that is against the Torah, their T'nai is null. Mishum dechol T'nai teka'akar le'lamase lav t'nahu, because any T'nai that undoes the agreement is not a T'nai. Shekivan she'amar al manat she'en lach alai, right? Haret mikudeshetli, that as soon as he says, on condition that you do not have any of these things against me, ksut, share, and ona, that you can claim, you are mikudeshet, chalu hakidushin, shematzu makom lachul, right? The kiddushin found a way to be affected. Shaharei efshar lihitkayem hatnai shelo yitain lasher ksut v'ona, because it's possible that he won't actually give her these things. And therefore, because of Kiddushin, because the Kiddushin somehow were chal, they're not halfway chal. There's no halfway Ishut. Now, I have to be honest, I'm not sure. I don't quite understand what he means by because it's possible that this could happen, that he wouldn't give her share ksutenona, and therefore the kiddushin are already chal. Is that maybe saying because it's not impossible, as opposed to something like that you wouldn't be zkuka liyibum or liyavam? It's unclear to me whether he's saying, you know, kiddushin is something strange and different, or whether he's saying actually, you know, yeah, I'm being honest. I don't quite understand what he's saying, and I haven't seen people quite explain it. But I definitely invite people to think more about this and to look at the Chidushei Ramban. Um, to look at the Chidushei Ramban there, it just seems that there is a, something automatic that is going on because of Kiddushin. Okay, I want to end with another exception. And the exception that I want to end with is an exception seemingly to Matneu Mashakatu Torah, not related to Mammon, right? Meaning we're supposed to say Matneu Mashakatu Torah, Tna'o Batel. Generally speaking, the Tnai doesn't work. But we have this Mishnah in Menachot which says something really interesting in Parakid Gimel. Hareini Nazir Yigalech B'Mikdash. If a person says that they are a Nazir, they are supposed to do the Giluach, the shaving ceremony at the end as part of the Tara process in the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. But Be'im Gilach Beveit Chonyo Lo Yatsa. And if they decided instead to do the shaving ceremony in the house of Onias, which, believe it or not, was a temple in Egypt that stood at the same time as the Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, pretty wild. They are not Yotze. They're not Yotze. They're not Yotze. They're Tahara. Okay. What about if they say Sha'agalach Beveit Chonyo? I am a Nazir. They say, like they didn't say the word almanah. They didn't say on condition, but that I will do the shaving in the house of Onias. So what's the law then? Now I would expect people to say, okay, kol tanai sheba mamon. Excuse me, now mashkatu b'torah. It's not obatel. Like who cares? The person is a nazir, and they can't go do the giluach. They can't go do the shaving in the house of Onias. But that's not what the Mishnah says. Mishnah says, sure, Yegalach b'mikdash. What they should do is, if they're a Nazir, they should go to the Mikdash and do their Giluach there. But v'im Gilach b'veit Chonyo yatsa. But if they did the shaving at the house of Chonyo, the house of Onias, they're Yotze. Now, this is very, very strange. So the Gemara itself actually says that if they end up going to the Mikdash, then they're showing that they're a Nazir, and they're showing that they're a Nazir, and they're fine. But if they end up going to the house of Onias, what they're really showing is they were never actually a Nazir. They were just trying to be somewhat ascetic. And what we recognize is that what they were saying is, I'm an ascetic, and I'm just going to go do this shaving at the house of Onias, which means we give some weight to their proclamation that they said, so that I go to the house of Onias, right? Yatsa, it doesn't mean they're Yotze, they're Tara, as a Nazir. It means what they did was fine. Like they're not in trouble as, a Nazir who didn't do their proper Giluach, a Nazir that didn't do their proper shaving, as you saw at the beginning of the Mishnah. They are something else. So their Tanai revealed about them that because they ended up going to Temple of Onias, they were never a Nazir in the first place. But that means we didn't just ignore the Tanai. It ended up being transformative. And so the Tosfot say, what's going on here? But Omer Rabbeinu Yitzchak, Delo Amrin now Masha Katuv B'Tarot Tna'o Batel, Ella, the only place where we say somebody who is making a Tanai against the Torah, the Tanai is totally void and we don't think about it at all and it doesn't impact anything. Only when a person is trying to undermine something written in the Torah. Aval hatam savur sheyesh mitzvah beveit chonyo kimo beveit hamikdash. This person clearly thought that there's something good about going to shave in the temple of Onias the same way it would be fine to do that. It would be the right thing to do in the Beit HaMikdash. Ve'ein mitkaven la'akor, right? They were not trying to undermine. And in that case, itlan lomelaf mitnai divnei Gad uvnei Reuven. If that's the case, it's close enough, parallel enough to the Tnai of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. And I just think this is very interesting because it goes to, it goes to Kavana. I think it's very interesting. And I think it opens a whole Pandora's box, to be honest, but it does go because, okay, you think this, you think that. What about somebody who doesn't know other things, right? Doesn't know that a Nazir doesn't drink wine, doesn't, right? There's a lot of things that, could end up on the chopping block here. But it is just intriguing to think about this as a Yotzei Min HaKlal. Thanks, everybody. I hope this gave you some interesting food for thought as to, I would say, the relationship between what we say and what the Torah has already required. Because the whole realm of people being mechayvim themselves, people obligating themselves in something, is on the same track as the idea that Torah obligates you in something. And the idea here seems to be that in general, we do not think that your decision to obligate yourself in something can run counter to the Torah's decision to obligate you in the opposite. And even in Kol T'nai Sheb'Mamon Kayam, it seems you are still obligated. It's just that the other party waives their rights to it. To be continued. Thank you, everybody.